Hands where I can see them, now. The command cut through the night before Marcus Reed even saw the flashing lights, red and blue reflections slicing across his windshield, bouncing off the quiet stretch of asphalt like something alive, something watching, and for a second, his hands hovered just above the steering wheel, not out of fear, but calculation, the kind that came from years of knowing exactly how moments like this could turn if handled wrong. Slowly, deliberately, he raised them, fingers spread, palms steady in the dim glow of the dashboard. The engine still humming low beneath him, a soft mechanical breath against the tension outside. He could hear footsteps approaching, gravel crunching under heavy boots, measured, controlled, the kind of walk that carried authority without needing to announce it. And then a knock on the glass. Firm, not aggressive, but not friendly either. Marcus turned his head just enough to see the outline of the officer, tall, broad shoulders, white, jaw set like he had already decided something long before stepping out of the cruiser. Step out of the vehicle. The officer said again, voice even, practiced. Marcus nodded once, slow, acknowledging, as if agreeing to a script he didn't write but knew by heart. He reached for the door handle, careful, making sure every movement was visible, intentional. The door opened with a quiet click, cool air slipping inside, carrying the faint scent of rain on pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, headlights streaking by like a reminder that the world was still moving. Even if this moment felt suspended, Marcus stepped out, standing straight, not rigid, just present, his shirt slightly wrinkled from a long day, sleeves rolled just enough to show his wrists. Empty, harmless. The officer circled the front of the car, joined by another, younger, quieter, eyes scanning Marcus like he was trying to piece together a story from fragments that didn't quite fit. License and registration, the first officer said. Marcus nodded again, reached slowly into his pocket, every motion deliberate, controlled, the leather of his wallet worn but clean. He handed it over without a word. The officer barely glanced at him as he took it, flipping it open, scanning, then glancing back up, something unreadable passing through his eyes. You know why we stopped you? Marcus asked, not challenging, not defensive, just calm, steady, like someone asking about the weather. The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past Marcus, toward the car, toward the interior, toward something unseen, something assumed. We'll get to that, he said finally, nodding toward the vehicle. Mind if we take a look inside? There it was, the shift, subtle but unmistakable, the line between routine and something else. Marcus exhaled quietly, not a sigh, not resignation, just a measured breath, his gaze drifting for a brief second to the flashing lights reflecting in the side mirror. Red, blue, red again, like a pulse, like a warning, then back to the officer. If there's a reason, he said softly, his voice even, controlled, but carrying something beneath it, something the officer didn't immediately recognize. The second officer shifted his weight, glancing between them, the night growing heavier in the silence that followed, and somewhere, just beneath the surface of it all, something was about to change. Marcus did not move right away, not because he was refusing, but because he understood the weight of what had just been asked, the kind of question that sounded optional but rarely was. The air between them tightening as the red and blue lights continued their slow rotation, painting his face in alternating color, revealing nothing and everything at the same time. He lowered his hands gradually, not fully, just enough to rest them lightly against the roof of the car, fingers still visible, still compliant. I am not trying to make this difficult, he said quietly, his voice steady, measured, like someone choosing each word before letting it go. I just want to understand the reason. Officer Hayes let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, more like impatience wearing a thin disguise. He shifted his stance, one hand resting near his belt, not threatening, but intentional. You were drifting between lanes back there, he said, nodding toward the empty road behind them. Looked suspicious. Marcus glanced briefly over his shoulder, the road stretching out in silence. No cars, no witnesses, just the hum of distant traffic far beyond the curve. Then back to Hayes. I corrected it within a second. Marcus replied calmly, not defensive, just factual. The younger officer stepped closer to the passenger side, peering through the window, his reflection blending with the dark interior. Sir, "Do you have anything in the vehicle we should know about?" he asked, his tone softer, but carrying the same underlying assumption. Marcus shook his head once, slow, deliberate. "No, I do not." Hayes nodded as if the answer had already been decided before it was spoken. "Then you will not mind if we take a quick look," he said, the word quick hanging in the air like a promise that did not need to be kept. Marcus held his gaze for a moment, just a moment longer than expected, and something in that silence shifted, subtle, almost invisible, but enough to make the younger officer glance back at Hayes, unsure. Marcus finally nodded once. "Go ahead," he said, stepping slightly to the side, creating space, not surrendering, just allowing. Hayes moved immediately, walking past him toward the driver's side door, opening it without hesitation, the interior light flickering on, illuminating the clean dashboard, the neatly folded jacket on the passenger seat, the faint scent of leather and something else, something older, paper, maybe, files. The younger officer circled to the back, his hand hovering over the trunk latch, pausing for half a second as if waiting for confirmation that never came. Then pressing it, the trunk popped open with a soft mechanical release. Marcus watched without turning his head fully, his eyes tracking only slightly, his posture unchanged, steady, grounded, like someone who had already accepted the outcome of something the others did not yet understand. The night seemed quieter now, the distant sounds fading, replaced by the small, deliberate movements of the officers searching, shifting, opening compartments, the rustle of fabric, the click of plastic, ordinary sounds, routine sounds, but beneath them, something heavier was building, something unspoken. Marcus drew in a slow breath, his chest rising just enough to be noticed if anyone had been looking closely. But they were not, their attention fixed on the car, on what they expected to find, not on the man standing just a few feet away, calm, composed, and waiting. Officer Hayes leaned into the driver's side, his flashlight cutting a narrow path across the interior, slow, deliberate, like he was expecting something to reveal itself if he moved just carefully enough. The beam passed over the dashboard, the center console, the folded jacket, then paused on a leather folder resting neatly on the passenger seat. Not hidden, not out of place, just there. Ordinary in a way that made it easy to overlook unless you were looking for something specific. Hayes reached in and picked it up, flipping it open with one hand, the light catching the edges of printed documents, crisp, organized, the kind of order that did not match the story he seemed to be building in his head. Meanwhile, at the back of the car, the younger officer lifted the trunk fully, the hinges creaking softly, revealing a space just as clean, a small duffel bag tucked to one side, a hard case secured with simple latches. Nothing chaotic, nothing careless. He hesitated again, just for a second, then crouched slightly, unzipping the duffel bag. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a pair of polished shoes, and a sealed envelope resting on top. Official looking, stamped. He frowned, glancing toward Hayes as if waiting for direction. But Hayes was still focused on the folder in his hand, flipping through pages now, slower, his movements less confident than before. Marcus stood where he had been, hands relaxed at his sides now, no longer raised, but still visible, still open, his breathing steady, his eyes calm, watching without staring, present without intruding, as if he had already seen this moment play out before, as if he knew exactly how it would unfold. The younger officer reached for the hard case next, fingers brushing over the surface before unlatching it. The click sounded louder than it should have in the quiet night. Inside, more documents. Organized, labeled, not random, not personal, something else entirely. He picked up one of the folders, opening it just enough for the contents to catch the glow of the patrol car lights. Bold lettering. Official insignia. His expression shifted, subtle, but real, his posture straightening slightly as he scanned the first page, then the second, his eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but in recognition, back at the driver's side. Hayes had stopped flipping pages altogether, one document held in place under his thumb, his gaze fixed on a line of text that seemed to anchor him there, unmoving, the flashlight beam trembling just enough to betray the change in his focus, the confidence from moments earlier thinning into something quieter, something uncertain. Marcus noticed it, not with a smile, not with satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement, his head tilting slightly, as if confirming something to himself. The younger officer stood up fully now, folder still in hand, turning toward Hayes. "Sir," he said, his voice lower than before, more careful. Hayes did not respond immediately, his eyes still locked on the document in front of him, the night pressing in around them, the flashing lights no longer sharp, but distant, like a memory repeating itself. "Sir," the younger officer repeated, taking a step closer, holding the folder out just enough to be seen. Hayes finally looked up, slowly, his expression no longer certain, no longer fixed, but shifting, recalculating, and for the first time since the stop began, the silence between them did not belong to the officers anymore. Hayes lowered the document slightly, just enough to look at the younger officer, his eyes searching for confirmation that what he was seeing was not being misread, not taken out of context. But the expression on the younger man's face gave him nothing reassuring, only a quiet seriousness that had not been there before, the kind that replaces assumption with awareness. Hayes cleared his throat, a small sound that seemed louder in the stillness, then glanced back down at the page, reading again. Slower this time, as if each word carried more weight now than it had a moment ago. Behind them, the patrol car lights continued their steady rhythm, red, blue, red, but the urgency they once carried had faded into something almost distant, almost irrelevant. Marcus remained where he stood, shoulders relaxed, hands at his sides, not shifting, not speaking, allowing the moment to unfold on its own terms. Hayes finally stepped back from the car, the folder still in his hand, his posture no longer rigid, no longer anchored in certainty. He looked toward Marcus, really looked this time, not scanning, not judging, but observing, as if trying to reconcile the man in front of him with the information now sitting in his grip. "You said you wanted a reason," Hayes began, his voice quieter, less commanding. Marcus met his gaze, calm, steady. "I did," he replied. Hayes hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then held up the document slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge it. "Why did you not say anything?" he asked, the question carrying more than curiosity, carrying the weight of what had just shifted between them. Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering the question, not rushing to answer. "Would it have changed how this started?" he asked, his tone even, not accusing, not defensive, just direct. Hayes did not respond immediately, his jaw tightening just enough to suggest that the answer existed, but was not something he wanted to say out loud. The younger officer stepped closer, still holding the folder he had found. "Sir," he said again, this time softer, almost a reminder. Hayes nodded once, acknowledging him without breaking eye contact with Marcus, then glanced briefly at the folder in the younger officer's hand, the insignia catching the light again, unmistakable now, undeniable. Hayes exhaled slowly, a controlled breath, as if resetting something inside himself. "Mr. Reed," he said, using the name from the document, testing it, confirming it. Marcus gave a small nod. "Yes." Hayes shifted his weight, the authority in his stance no longer gone, but altered, tempered. "These documents," he continued, choosing his words carefully now, "they indicate you are working with federal oversight." He did not say the full title, did not need to, the implication hung there clearly enough. Marcus did not look surprised, did not react beyond a slight narrowing of his eyes, not in anger, but in recognition of where the conversation had finally arrived. "They do," he said simply. The younger officer lowered the folder slightly, his earlier confidence replaced by something closer to caution. Hayes glanced once more at the open car, at the interior they had just searched, then back at Marcus. The silence stretching again, but different now, no longer filled with suspicion, but with realization, and for the first time since the lights had appeared behind the car, Hayes seemed unsure of what to do next. The air did not move, not in any way that mattered, even though the night breeze still brushed lightly across the open road, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and the low idle of the patrol engine, because what had shifted was not outside, it was between them, in the space where assumption had just collided with truth. Hayes looked down at the document again, then back at Marcus, as if trying to measure the distance between who he thought he had stopped and who now stood in front of him. The younger officer closed the trunk slowly, more carefully than before, as though the contents inside demanded a different kind of respect now. The soft thud echoed briefly and then disappeared into the quiet. "We were just conducting a routine stop," Hayes said, but the words felt thinner than before, less certain. Marcus did not interrupt, did not challenge. He simply listened, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. The kind that did not need to raise its voice to be felt. Hayes shifted. His weight again, the document still in his hand. "You understand that," he added, almost as if he needed the statement to be accepted, to be validated. Marcus held his gaze, his expression calm, but no longer neutral. There was something else there now, something firmer, something grounded in clarity. "I understand what you call it," he said quietly, his voice even, but carrying a weight that settled into the silence between them. Hayes blinked once, just once, the words landing heavier than expected. The younger officer glanced between them, sensing the change but not fully grasping its depth. Marcus took a slow breath, not to steady himself, but to mark the moment. "What I do not understand," he continued, "is how quickly it became something else." He did not raise his voice, did not accuse directly, but the implication was clear, precise, and impossible to ignore. Hayes opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again, searching for a response that would hold, that would restore control, but nothing came immediately. The flashing lights continued behind him, but they no longer framed authority, they framed exposure. Marcus stepped forward just half a pace, not invading space, just enough to close the distance in a way that shifted the balance. "You asked me why I did not say anything earlier," he said, his tone steady. "Because I wanted to see how far this would go without it." The younger officer's grip tightened slightly on the folder he held, the realization settling deeper now. Hayes's jaw set again, but this time, not from certainty, from discomfort, from the slow understanding that the situation had been observed, not just experienced. Marcus's eyes remained on him, unwavering. "Every decision matters," he added, "especially the ones made when you think no one is watching." The words did not sound like a warning, but they carried one, quiet, controlled, undeniable. Hayes exhaled slowly, longer this time, his shoulders lowering just slightly, the weight of the moment pressing in, the road behind them. Still empty, still silent, but no longer irrelevant, because what had just happened would not stay here, not in the dark, not in the quiet. And for the first time since the stop began, Hayes understood that this was no longer about a car, or a lane, or a routine question. It was about something much larger, something that had already begun long before the lights turned on, and Marcus Reed had been ready for it all along. The night seemed to settle after that, not quieter, but deeper, as if the space around them had absorbed every word and was holding it there, suspended, the red and blue lights still turning, but slower now in perception, like time itself had stretched just enough to let everything sink in. Marcus did not move, did not push the moment further. He simply stood, breathing steady, eyes calm, allowing the silence to do what it needed to do. Hayes lowered his gaze briefly, not in defeat, but in reflection. The document still in his hand no longer felt like evidence, it felt like consequence. The younger officer shifted his stance again, less rigid now, his earlier certainty replaced by a quiet awareness that something important had just happened, something that would not be written in any simple report. Hayes finally spoke, but his voice had changed, the edge softened, the authority still there, but tempered. "Mr. Reed," he said, more measured this time. "This stop, it went further than it should have." The admission was small, controlled, but it carried weight. Marcus listened, his expression unchanged, not satisfied, not relieved, just present. Hayes glanced toward the open car door, then toward the trunk, now closed, as if retracing the steps in his mind, each one clearer than before, each one harder to justify. "We made assumptions," he added, the words slower now, chosen, deliberate. The younger officer lowered his eyes for a moment, acknowledging the truth without speaking it himself. Marcus exhaled quietly, a soft breath that did not release tension so much as mark the transition from one moment to the next. "Assumptions are not the problem," Marcus said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "It is what you do with them." Hayes looked back at him, really listening now, not preparing a response, not holding a position, just hearing. The flashing lights reflected across his face, but they no longer defined him. They revealed him. Marcus continued, not pressing, not lecturing, just stating what had already become clear. You had a choice at every step, he said, and each one moved this further away from routine. The younger officer swallowed slightly, his grip on the folder loosening, the edges of the paper catching the light. Hayes nodded once, slow, acknowledging more than the words, acknowledging the pattern, the progression, the reality of how quickly control had turned into overreach. The road behind them remained empty, stretching out into darkness, but it no longer felt like isolation. It felt like a record, a place where something had been seen. Hayes straightened slightly, not to regain dominance, but to regain clarity. You are right, he said, the words simple, but not easy. Marcus did not respond immediately. He just watched, giving the moment space to land fully, to settle without interruption. The younger officer stepped back half a pace, instinctively creating distance, not from Marcus, but from what had just unfolded. Hayes handed the document back slowly, careful, respectful, the movement deliberate in a way it had not been before. Marcus took it without looking down, his focus still on Hayes, still steady, still composed. And in that quiet exchange, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but recognition, the kind that cannot be undone once it has been seen. The lights continued to turn, but the scene had changed, and neither of them could step back into what it had been before. For a moment, no one spoke, and in that silence, the weight of everything that had just unfolded settled fully into place, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Marcus held the document loosely at his side, his fingers resting against the edge as if it were just another piece of paper, even though everyone standing there now understood it was far more than that. Hayes took a small step back, not retreating, but creating space, the kind of space that comes when control shifts and something deeper takes its place. His eyes moved briefly toward his patrol car, toward the radio mounted inside, then back to Marcus, as if considering something beyond the moment, something larger than the stop itself. Internal affairs, Hayes said quietly, not as a question, but as a realization finally spoken out loud. Marcus did not nod immediately. He let the words sit there, let them carry their own weight before responding. Federal oversight, he corrected calmly, his tone not sharp, but precise. The distinction mattered, and Hayes understood that now. The younger officer's posture straightened again, but not out of authority, out of awareness, his earlier uncertainty replaced by a quiet tension, like someone realizing they had stepped into something far beyond what they had expected. Hayes ran a hand briefly along his jaw, his gaze lowering for a second before returning to Marcus. This was part of something, he said, more to himself than to Marcus, connecting the pieces slowly, carefully. Marcus watched him, not confirming, not denying, just allowing Hayes to arrive at the truth on his own. The flashing lights reflected in Hayes's eyes, but they no longer masked anything. They revealed the shift, the recognition that this moment had not been random, that every word, every action had now become part of something documented, something that would not fade with the night. You knew, Hayes said finally, looking directly at Marcus, the statement carrying both realization and a quiet disbelief. Marcus met his gaze, steady, unwavering. I hoped I was wrong, he replied. And the honesty in that answer landed harder than anything else that had been said. The younger officer glanced down, then away, as if needing a moment to process what that meant. Hayes exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, but it carried the weight of everything shifting inside him. There will be a report, he said, the words careful now, no longer procedural, but personal. Marcus gave a slight nod. There always is, he replied, his voice calm, not threatening, not satisfied, just factual. Hayes looked toward the road again, the empty stretch of asphalt that had seemed so ordinary minutes ago, now feeling like the starting point of something far more significant. And what happens next? Hayes asked, the question no longer about authority, but about consequence. Marcus did not answer right away. He took a slow breath, his eyes moving briefly to the patrol car lights, then back to Hayes. That depends, he said quietly, on everything that has already happened. The younger officer shifted his weight again, the folder still in his hands now feeling heavier than before. Hayes nodded once, understanding more than he wanted to admit. The night remained still, but the moment had changed completely, and there was no going back to what it had been. Hayes stood there a moment longer. The question he had asked still hanging in the air, but now it felt smaller, less important than the realization settling into his chest. Marcus did not rush to fill the silence. He simply watched, steady, present, allowing Hayes the space to arrive where he needed to without being pushed. The younger officer shifted again, then slowly closed the folder in his hands. The soft sound final, like a decision being made without words. Hayes glanced at him, then back at Marcus, and something in his posture changed, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. His shoulders eased, his stance no longer defensive, no longer trying to hold on to control that had already slipped. "Mr. Reed," he said, more carefully now. "I am going to be clear." He paused, not for effect, but because the words mattered now. This should not have gone the way it did. Marcus held his gaze, not interrupting, not softening the moment, just letting it stand on its own. Hayes continued. "We made decisions based on assumptions, and we carried them further than we should have. The admission came without excuse, without justification, and that made it heavier, more real." The younger officer nodded slightly, almost instinctively, his voice quiet when he added, "We should have slowed it down." Marcus's expression did not change, but there was a shift in his eyes, something subtle, something that acknowledged the honesty without rewarding it. Hayes took another breath, steadier now. "I am responsible for that," he said, the words landing firmly, not deflected, not shared. Marcus inclined his head just slightly. Not approval, not forgiveness, just recognition. Hayes looked toward the open driver's side door, then stepped forward, reaching in and turning off the interior light, the glow fading, returning the car to the night. He closed the door gently, a small act, but intentional, then moved toward the trunk, placing his hand on the lid for a second before stepping back, leaving it closed, leaving everything as it should have been from the start. The younger officer walked around to the side, stopping near the patrol car, his hands now empty, no longer holding anything that did not belong to him. Hayes turned back to Marcus. "You are free to go," he said, but this time the words did not sound like permission. They sounded like correction, like something being restored rather than granted. Marcus did not move immediately. He looked at Hayes for a moment longer, reading something deeper than the words, something in the way they were said, then gave a small nod. "Thank you," he replied, his tone calm, respectful, but not deferential. Hayes stepped back, creating a clear path, no longer blocking, no longer directing, just standing aside. Marcus walked to the driver's side, opened the door, and paused for a brief second, his hand resting on the frame. He glanced once more at Hayes, not to challenge, not to remind, just to mark the moment. Then he got in, the engine still running, the low hum unchanged, the world outside still moving, still indifferent. Hayes watched as Marcus adjusted his seat slightly, his movements unhurried, controlled, then placed both hands on the wheel again, just as he had at the beginning. But everything between those two moments had changed. The patrol lights continued to flash, but they no longer defined the scene. They simply illuminated what had already been revealed. And as Marcus eased the car forward, pulling back onto the empty road, the distance between them grew slowly, steadily, leaving behind not just a traffic stop, but something neither of them would forget. The road stretched ahead in a long, quiet line, the kind that seemed to go on forever without asking anything in return, and Marcus kept his eyes forward, both hands steady on the wheel, the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt smooth and even, like nothing had happened, like the last few minutes had not shifted something deeper than the night itself. In the rearview mirror, the flashing lights grew smaller, softer, until they were no longer lights at all, just faint colors dissolving into darkness. He did not look back again, not because he was avoiding it, but because there was nothing left there for him to see. The moment had already passed, already taken its shape, and now it belonged to something else, something beyond the road. Back on the shoulder, Hayes stood beside his patrol car, the engine still running, the lights still turning, but the scene felt different now, emptier in a way that had nothing to do with space. The younger officer leaned lightly against the side of the vehicle, arms loose at his sides, both of them watching the taillights of Marcus's car fade into the distance, neither speaking, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been done. Hayes finally reached up and turned off the light bar. The sudden stillness almost louder than the noise had been. The darkness settling back into its natural place. Uninterrupted, the road returning to what it had always been. Just a road. But the silence that followed was not the same as before. It carried weight now. Understanding, the kind that does not leave easily. Hayes looked down at his hands for a moment, as if expecting to find something different there. Something that explained the shift he felt, but could not fully name. Then he exhaled slowly. The breath steady, controlled, but heavier than before. The younger officer pushed himself off the car and stood upright, glancing once more down the empty road, then back at Hayes. That was not routine, he said quietly, not accusing, not questioning, just stating what had already become obvious. Hayes nodded once, his gaze still fixed ahead. No, he replied, his voice low. It was not. The words settled between them. Simple, but final. The younger officer looked down briefly, then back up, as if committing the moment to memory, not the details, but the feeling of it, the way something small had revealed something much larger. Hayes turned and walked to the driver's side door of the patrol car, opening it slowly, then pausing before getting in, his hand resting on the frame just like Marcus had done moments earlier. The reflection did not go unnoticed, even if it was not spoken. He stood there for a second longer, then sat inside, closing the door with a soft, deliberate click. The engine hummed steadily, the dashboard lights casting a dim glow across his face. But he did not reach for the radio, did not start the car moving. Instead, he just sat, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring forward at the empty road. And in that quiet, with no lights flashing and no voices filling the space, there was nothing left to distract from what remained. The understanding that power had been tested, that assumptions had been exposed, and that the moment, simple as it had seemed, would echo far beyond this stretch of pavement, not in noise, not in headlines, but in something quieter, something that stayed. Like the absence of sound after everything else fades, like the kind of silence that does not ask to be heard, but is impossible to ignore.